I expected a typical service call. A tired drip from a leaky faucet, maybe an easy clog lurking beneath a sink. Nothing remarkable. But behind the door, on the third floor, something unexpected was waiting. Something I knew, instantly, I couldn't walk away from. I'd been a plumber for over a decade. That's enough time to know the caustic smell of bad insulation, the crying protest of a stressed pipe, and the exact rising temperature that screams a water heater is about to give out. My typical days were a blur of lukewarm coffee, perpetually scraped knuckles, and clients who barely glanced up before pointing me toward the problem. It was honest work, but profoundly unthrilling. That morning was no different until the final job request flashed on my phone. Urgent kitchen leak, high-rise, single tenant, willing to pay extra for immediate help. Normally, I would pass on a rush job, but this came through a contractor I trusted. And the words, willing to pay extra, were enough to make me shrug, hit accept, and reroute the van. The building was all modern angles, sleek glass, and cold concrete, with minimalist balconies. It was the kind of place that charged double just for the zip code. Walking through the pristine lobby, even in my cleanest work shirt and steel-toed boots, I felt awkwardly out of place. The elevator hummed its way up, and by the time I knocked on Unit 3F, toolbox in hand, I'd convinced myself this would be quick and entirely forgettable. But when the door opened, every thought of broken pipes vanished. The man who answered wasn't a standard client. He looked like he belonged on a magazine cover, or maybe at the close of some intense Netflix series. Dark hair, just messy enough to look deliberate. A faded blue tank top clinging in a way that truly wasn't fair. Bare feet sinking slightly into polished hardwood. "You must be the plumber," he said, the word leaving his mouth with a slow smile, as if it were a private joke just for us. Yeah, I managed, clearing the dryness from my throat. Sebastian, he replied, stepping aside. "Come in. Kitchen's this way." The apartment was intensely bright, flooded with the late afternoon light streaming through huge windows. It smelled faintly of clean citrus, lived in but immaculately kept. A guitar leaned against the wall in the living room. A hoodie was casually tossed over the sofa, not messy, just human. Sebastian motioned toward the sink. "Started last night. Just a few slow drips at first. By morning, it was a full-on puddle." I panicked and shut off the water. I crouched, opened the cabinet doors, and gave a brief nod. "Smart move. Let me take a look." The moment I shifted into work mode, some of the initial haze lifted. My hands knew the rhythm. Flashlight in one, wrench in the other. Still, it was impossible to ignore him. He was leaning casually against the kitchen island behind me. Arms crossed, his collarbone catching the sharp light. "Probably the pet trap," I mumbled, shining the beam. Sure enough, a small cracked coupling. I found the culprit. I turned to tell him, and realized he was watching me. Not casually, but deliberately. His gaze didn't drop when I met it. "You always this focused?" he asked. I blinked. "When I'm fixing something." "Yeah," he smiled, slow and deep. "Good. I like people who know what they're doing." A sudden heat crept up the back of my neck, but I turned back to the pipes, twisting the old piece loose and fitting the new one into place. Still, I could feel his eyes locked on me. The air between us had shifted, quiet but charged. "So, Theo," he said after a moment. "Last job of the day." "Yeah," I muttered, testing the seal. "Why?" he shrugged. "A light motion. Just wondering if you're the kind of guy who goes straight home after work, or if you take a break first." "Depends," I said carefully. "Sometimes I grab a beer. Sometimes I just crash. Depends on how the day's been, and today." His voice was softer now. I kept my eyes on the joint, checking for leaks. "Today's been quiet." "Good," he said. "Means you might still have some energy left." I turned, just slightly, enough to see his expression. Open, steady, waiting. He wasn't pushing, just leaving a door gently ajar. My throat felt bone dry. I swallowed, then sat back on my heels, wiping my palms on the rag tucked into my belt. "It's fixed," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "No more leaks." He stepped closer, nodding once without even glancing at the pipes. "Thanks. You're fast." I gave a small shrug, but silence instantly filled the space again. He was standing maybe 3 feet away, close enough that I noticed the faint, fine scar along his jaw, and the way his dark lashes curved naturally upward. I was still crouched by the cabinet, but I didn't move. Neither did he. "You want water?" he asked, suddenly casual. "Or something else to drink?" "I'm good," I said, even though my mouth felt like cotton. He nodded again. To my surprise, he didn't leave the room. Instead, he moved around the counter and lowered himself to the floor beside me. He just sat there, on the polished hardwood, like we were about to share a private conversation beneath the sink. "You're not what I expected," he said, after a pause. I let out a short, quiet laugh. "Yeah, I get that a lot." "No, I mean it," he insisted. "You've got this presence. Calm, like you don't need to say much to fill a room." This time, I didn't laugh. I just looked at him, truly looked. There was no smirk, no game in his eyes, just an open curiosity that seemed to see more than I was ready to admit. "I'm just a plumber," I said quietly. He tilted his head. "Right now, maybe. But I've met a lot of people who work for a living. That doesn't mean it's all they are." His words landed somewhere much deeper than I expected. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't walking out of this apartment anytime soon. Sebastian's knee was only inches from mine. It was a kind of closeness that felt profoundly intentional. I could hear the faint tick of a distant clock, the hum of the refrigerator. But louder than all of it was the steady gravitational pull of his presence beside me. There was no explicit flirtation in his expression. Not in the usual sense, just something open, curious, and willing to wait. I finally allowed my shoulders to relax, leaning back until they rested against the cabinet. My fingers absently traced the edge of the rag still in my lap, trying to cling to something ordinary. But nothing about this felt ordinary. I'd fixed 1,000 leaks in 100 kitchens, yet no one had ever sat on the floor beside me like this. Barefoot, soft-spoken, with eyes that looked past the grit on my hands and the creases in my shirt. "You always sit on the floor with strangers?" I asked, aiming for lightness, though my chest betrayed me with its restless, internal heat. Sebastian chuckled, still holding my gaze. "Only when they fix things with their hands, and then look at me like they don't realize what that does to a person." His words landed sharper than I expected. Not crude, not overdone, just honest and disarming. I shifted slightly, resting an elbow on my knee. For a moment, a small part of me clung to the familiar script. Get in, fix, get out. But this didn't feel scripted anymore. It felt dangerous in the most intoxicating way. "I don't usually get invited to stay after a job," I said at last, "let alone sit on kitchen floors." He smiled softer this time. "You don't seem like the kind of guy who stays long enough to be invited." I exhaled slowly through my nose. He wasn't wrong. My life had been built on boundaries, on fixing things, not feeling them. I wasn't supposed to be sitting here, my heartbeat steady but heavy, wondering what would happen if I leaned just a little closer. But I was wondering. He shifted again, a subtle movement, until his thigh brushed mine warm, solid. The contact jolted through me like a live wire. I didn't pull away, neither did he. "I made tea," he said suddenly, the shift in topic gentle. "Would you have some? You look like you could use something warm." I nodded before the agreement even registered, my voice swallowed by the strange hum in my veins. He moved with quiet grace to the stove, where a white kettle rested. I pressed my hands flat on the floor, steadying myself, glancing at the sink I'd just repaired. A tight seal, no leaks, a clean job. Yet I felt far less stable now than when I was crawling under those rusted pipes. He poured the tea carefully, the steam curling between us. His silhouette was framed by the golden spill of the early evening light. He returned and set a mug before me, warm ceramic in my hands, chamomile on my tongue. It was smooth, floral, and faintly sweet. It wasn't my usual choice, but it was perfect in this moment. We settled on the bar stools, side by side, and the conversation found an easy, unforced rhythm. I told him about the time I got stuck in a crawlspace He laughed, and I caught myself smiling into my cup. He countered with a story about flooding his first bathroom through sheer duct upon determination. I laughed then, and he looked only amused by his past struggles. But beneath the stories and the laughter, that constant hum persisted, a pull neither of us dared to name, yet neither of us pulled away from. When my mug was empty, Sebastian took it gently, gathering both. His fingers brushed mine, sparking that familiar pause, that question lingering, unspoken. He turned fully to face me, his voice low and careful. "You can say no. You can walk out right now and I won't stop you. But if you're feeling what I think you're feeling, then stay." I met his gaze, and in that long, suspended moment, the entire world outside the kitchen walls simply disappeared. It was just two men in a room where the pipes had been fixed, but something else had just broken open instead. I rose slowly, stepping closer until only the slightest space remained. My hand lifted almost on its own, fingers tracing the side of his neck. He didn't flinch. If anything, he leaned into the touch. "I don't stay," I whispered, not as a warning, but as a confession. "I know," he murmured. His eyes didn't waver. "But maybe tonight, you do." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of permission, of promise, of something deeper than either of us had said aloud. When I finally kissed him, it wasn't fast. It wasn't a question anymore, it was an answer. His lips met mine like he'd been waiting. Not just since I walked through his door, but maybe for a long time. The kiss was slow, deliberate, yet beneath it was a trembling energy, as if something long hidden had finally broken free. My hand found the back of his neck, his fingers curled against my shirt. The world tilted gently around us. There was no rush, no sense of conquering. Only the steady unfolding of truth, the kind of truth you discover in quiet closeness, in breaths shared between two people who hadn't meant to find each other, but somehow had. As the kiss deepened, I realized I wasn't thinking about work anymore. Not about pipes or tools. Whatever this was, it wasn't about what had been broken, but about what was beginning to open. We stayed close after that first kiss, breathing the same air, our foreheads nearly touching. It felt fragile, like any space between us might unravel what had just begun to stitch itself together. His fingers trembled where they clung to my shirt, and I knew mine were no steadier. Neither of us was ready to let go. The silence was charged, alive like the moment just before a storm or a confession. His eyes searched mine, asking a question without words. I didn't answer, not yet. Instead, I leaned in again, more deliberate this time, and kissed him with a depth that made it impossible to pretend this was chance. He responded, his touch careful, but certain, as though each movement carried meaning. It wasn't just contact. It was discovery. His hand lingered at my shoulder, tracing the back of my neck, and I felt each gesture as if he were writing something across my skin. Eventually, we pulled apart, but only slightly. His gaze was glassy, his breath uneven, mirroring mine. Without a word, he reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and gently guided me out of the kitchen. My tools sat forgotten by the sink as we stepped into the quiet of the living room. The apartment was hushed, save for the faint city sounds beyond the glass. When we stopped by the couch, he turned toward me, his hands resting lightly at my sides, not demanding, just asking. I didn't need words to understand. I leaned forward and our lips met again. This time, there was more urgency, but not recklessness. Just two people moving closer, building something carefully, one breath at a time. He steadied me, grounding me, as if the room and the city beyond it had all fallen away. And in that stillness, I realized this wasn't just desire. It was something deeper. A space I hadn't opened for years. One I didn't even know I'd been guarding. Yet somehow, here with him, it had unlocked. We didn't rush. We stayed present, memorizing the quiet rhythm between us. The way his hand lingered in mine. The way my breath caught when his forehead pressed gently against mine. It wasn't about speed or conquest. It was about trust, about honesty, about letting ourselves exist in that fragile, unspoken space. When our eyes met again, there were no promises, No explanations, only truth. I hadn't come here expecting this. I hadn't come here looking for it. But somehow, it had found me as he leaned against me. His cheek resting over my heartbeat. I held him close, knowing that whatever came next, the moment itself was real. All I could think about was how right it felt to have him there. Warm, close, like he'd always belonged in that exact space. And we were only just realizing it now. His fingers traced idle shapes along my ribs, not searching for anything, just moving as if the silence itself needed a softer rhythm. Every so often, he shifted, pressing a gentle kiss to my chest, or tucking the blanket higher, but he never pulled away. He didn't retreat into awkwardness. He stayed, and I stayed too. That was the part I couldn't explain. I was supposed to leave. That was the rule I'd lived by for years. Don't linger. Don't blur lines. Don't mistake a job for anything more. But nothing about this felt like a mistake. If anything, it felt clearer than anything I'd known in a long time. Eventually, he spoke, his voice low, barely a whisper, as if afraid to break what we'd built. "You okay?" he asked, his head still resting against me. I nodded before realizing he couldn't see it. "Yeah," I said softly. "More than okay," he hummed, the quiet vibration against my chest. "You're quiet. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," he murmured. "I just didn't want you to feel like you had to disappear." The words struck something deep, something raw I hadn't even admitted to myself. He was right. My instinct was always to slip away before the questions started, before the real world pressed in. But with him, I didn't want to. That truth tightened in my chest. Not fear, but the kind of ache that comes with wanting something more than you're ready to admit. "I've never done this," I said quietly. "Not like this." Not after. Sebastian finally lifted his head, leaning on one elbow so he could see me. His hair was tousled, his eyes soft, yet sharp with understanding. "You mean staying?" he asked. I nodded. He studied my face for a long moment, then reached up with a gentleness that nearly undid me, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "You don't have to explain," he said. "But I'm glad you did." That simplicity, no pressure, no expectation, loosened something heavy in my chest. I reached up, cupped the back of his neck, and drew him down into a kiss. Slow, deliberate. It wasn't rushed or heated this time, but grounding. Like saying thank you without words. When we pulled apart, I whispered, "Can I stay a little longer?" His smile was soft, almost shy. "Stay as long as you want." And so we did. We stayed wrapped up together, letting the world outside blur into nothing. At some point, my stomach growled, and he laughed against my neck, before slipping away to the kitchen. I watched him move, hair messy, eyes still heavy with everything that had passed between us. And it hit me again how unexpected this was. I had walked into this apartment to fix a leak. I was supposed to be gone before sunset. Instead, I was watching a man hum softly as he made grilled cheese like it was the most natural thing in the world. We ate on the couch, cross-legged, knees brushing. He handed me a soda, propped his feet up carelessly on the table, and grinned when I teased. "Do you always make sandwiches for your plumber?" "Only the ones who kiss me," he smirked. I laughed, shaking my head. "Guess I'll have to start charging extra." The playfulness dimmed for a moment, something more serious flickering in his eyes. "You think this is going to complicate things?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to lie. But I also didn't want to shadow what was happening between us. Finally, I leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if it might hand me the truth. "I don't know," I admitted. "Probably, but I'm not ready to walk away from it." He nodded slowly, absorbing that without pushing. "Good," he said. "Because I don't want you to." Later, when the sun had set, and the only light came from a lamp glowing warm in the corner, we sank back into the couch together. He rested against me, and I held him. Neither of us talked much. We didn't need to. Our breathing aligned, our bodies settling into a rhythm that felt like safety. At some point, I drifted into sleep. When I stirred again, the room was darker, the lamp turned off. Sebastian was still there, shifting just enough to pull a blanket over us. Noticing I was awake, he whispered, "Didn't want to wake you. You looked peaceful." I reached for his arm, grounding myself with a touch. I don't remember the last time I felt like this. He pressed a small kiss to my shoulder before curling against me again. We fell asleep like that, limbs tangled, wrapped not just in warmth, but in a quiet promise neither of us had to put into words. It wasn't about the kiss anymore, not even about the pull of attraction. It was about the choice to stay, the decision not to run. And as the night deepened around us, I knew something had shifted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man just passing through someone else's life. I felt like I belonged right where I was. The next morning, I woke to sunlight filtering through the curtains and the even warmer weight of Sebastian draped half across me. My arm was numb under him, but I didn't move. I just stayed, breathing in the quiet, the faint coffee scent in the air. His breath soft against my chest. When his eyes opened, he looked at me without surprise or awkwardness. Just present, just real. You stayed, he murmured with a faint, sleepy smile. I did, I said, and I wasn't sure who was more surprised, him or me. He reached up, fingertips brushing my cheek, like he wasn't sure if I was real. Good, he whispered, before kissing my jaw with the lightest touch. I wasn't sure if you would, neither was I admitted. The truth was, the thought of leaving had crossed my mind more than once during the night. But I hadn't. I stayed. Not because I was trapped or forced, but because something inside me had finally stopped running. And in that moment, with the light falling across his shoulders and his hand resting over my chest like it belonged there, I knew my choice wasn't a mistake. We moved slowly, reluctantly through the apartment as if we were still half lost in a dream. He made coffee while I sat at the small dining table. Watching him move barefoot across the kitchen, yawning between steps, the hem of his t-shirt brushing his thighs. It was intimate in a way that tightened my throat. Not because it was suggestive, but because it was real, unforced, familiar, in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. He set a cup of coffee in front of me without asking how I liked it, just warm, black, rich. It tasted better than anything I'd made for myself in months, maybe because it wasn't only coffee. It was shared space, a shared morning, shared breath. We sat across from each other, in silence. Not the heavy kind, not awkward, but earned. Like we no longer needed to fill every pause with words, just to prove we were okay. Eventually, I said, I've got another job today. A couple, actually, but they're small ones. He looked up, nodded. Back to normal. I don't know what normal is anymore, I admitted. That made him smile. Soft, but deep, like he understood exactly what I meant. I won't ask for more than you're willing to give, he said gently. I just don't want to pretend this didn't happen. I don't either. And if you want to come back, he added, you don't need a leak as an excuse. That made me laugh. Low, real, the kind of sound that comes from deep in the chest. Good to know. I should probably leave my wrench here as an excuse. You can leave whatever you want, he said, quieter now, more serious. Your tools, your number, your ... He paused, searching. Your presence, if that's something you're willing to share. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Small, simple, but it said everything I couldn't put into words. His fingers turned under mine, gripping back, strong, steady. I left an hour later, not rushed, not half-dressed, but with intention. He kissed me by the door, slow and steady, and I walked out carrying more than just my gear. I carried the beginning of a second life. Over the next few weeks, we kept things quiet. Sometimes I'd come by in the evenings after work, when the sky was turning orange over the city skyline. He'd cook, or we'd order takeout and eat it on the floor. Legs tangled, voices low, as if we didn't want to break the spell we'd stumbled into. Sometimes we talked for hours about childhood regrets, the strange in-between years we'd both drifted through. Other times, we didn't talk at all. We just existed near each other, letting that closeness speak for us, and when I wasn't with him, I noticed the world differently. The way light hits certain windows before dusk. How a stranger's laugh could echo down a hallway and make the space feel less lonely. My clients noticed, too. One woman asked if I'd fallen in love. I gave a quiet, crooked smile. I didn't know I still had it in me to say something like that. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. One evening after dinner, and a glass of wine that lingered on the tongue, I turned to him on the couch. "You know, I wasn't looking for this, right?" He nodded, eyes warm. "Neither was I, but I'm glad it happened, so am I." I took his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "You were the leak I didn't know needed fixing." He grinned, playful but soft. "And you were the one who finally made this place feel whole." We stayed like that for a while, his head against my shoulder, my arm around him, the night curling in around us, like a soft breath. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to brace for something to fall apart, because maybe, just maybe, this wasn't another job that ended once the tools were packed away. Maybe this was the start of something neither of us had planned, but both of us needed, and I wasn't coming to fix his pipes anymore. I came because I wanted to.